This video will teach you about documenting intake and output. In one chart, the intake and output iView band is found in the Flowsheet Doc tab of the patient's chart. First, an overview of the intake and output page. The gray bar along the top indicates the clinical range visible on the page being viewed. The next bar indicates totals and balances of intake and output for today and yesterday. Below that is the row of column headings which reflects the date and times to record data or within which data is already recorded. Using the scroll bar along the bottom will also reveal night shift total, day shift total, 24-hour total, and clinical range total columns. Hover over each one to see the time frame for that column. Also on this row are the Customize View and the Insert Date and Time icons. The body of the intake and output flowsheet section is where documentation occurs as appropriate. Whatever is highlighted under the intake and output iView bands in the middle of the page will appear as a route for the intake and output to the right. Remember that documenting intake and output in other parts of the flowsheet doc will be reflected in the intake and output section of the flowsheet. For example, a 100 milliliter bag of antibiotics scanned in through the medication administration wizard will flow into the intake totals. Initial output from a newly placed urinary catheter will flow into the output totals. There are several ways to modify the intake and output page to document appropriately. If you right-click in the gray parameters bar, you are able to modify the view on the page and modify the clinical range. If you modify the clinical range, you are able to see your totals for that specified time period in the clinical range column. If you select the Customize View icon, a dialog box appears. From the Customize tab, you are able to select additional or different routes or methods of intake and output. Many of the display names are able to be expanded to reveal more options. The Preferences tab within Customize View allows you to change such things as the default timescale, font size, and the chronological appearance of the entries. In this example, I will change the font size from 8 to 10 and change the timescale. To make an entry into a field, double-click the appropriate box based on the time frame across the top and the intake and/or output type along the side. For example, I will record that the patient had 240 milliliters oral intake. Once documentation is complete and double-checked for accuracy, you may click the green check mark to sign your documentation. This concludes documenting intake and output.